We are now dealing with chapter 11, and we will be looking at wealth and poverty from a Christian ethical perspective. Our objectives are that we should be able to describe capitalism and its alternatives, analyze the material and moral implication of wealth, explain stewardship and generosity as far as wealth is concerned, examine your attitudes and actions concerning material wealth, and then these are the contents we should be looking at: wealth and economics, traditional economics in Africa, capitalism and alternatives, the question of aid and debt in poor countries, obligation to the poor, simplicity and prosperity gospels, wealth and care for the environment. Then we shall conclude. This picture you are seeing portrays the kind of poverty we might have experienced or can look at, which might not even some of you have experienced in your environment, because we are living in somewhere modern Ugandan era, or where you come from outside Uganda. Such structures of housing may not be common to you, but if you visited some parts of Kampala, in the suburbs of Kampala, slums, you may find structures which may be close to waters or away from waters, but where people are sleeping in more or less the same like these structures. And this explain what part of poverty may look like. You can see another example there. And these things are very common. There are other indicators of poverty where you find people are living, at least these ones we may say they are much better than others. There are those who are assumed to be sleeping in the tunnels, trenches. I have ever even witnessed something similar to that, where people sleep in paper boxes on the Kampala streets, and others enter small sacks and they sleep on the street. So we want to define poverty. Poverty is known as the deprivation of food, shelter, money, and clothing that occurs when people cannot satisfy their basic needs. Poverty can be understood simply as a lack of money, or more broadly in terms of barriers to everyday life. You will hear some people say when they don't have money, they say, "I'm poor." But that is relative, because poverty is broad. It can include all those things that we have mentioned above. So, as law students or as the healthcare management students, what would be your definition? Because we have talked about issues to deal with health, but also in the legal perspective, sometimes we need to formulate a legal framework that can protect people from this deprivation. Facts about poverty globally. The World Bank estimated 1.29 billion people who were living in absolute poverty in 2008, which means by now this number should have gone up. We don't expect it to have gone down, because situations and contexts have dictated the way how people are getting lower and lower because of the higher demands of life which they cannot meet. Of these, about 400 million people are in absolute poverty living in India. And this India issue, I do very well witness it. Leave it. I have witnessed it. I have visited a slum which accommodates so many millions of people. It stretches about more than a mile. and people live there. And when you go there, you see really that there is poverty. So, about 400 million people lived in absolute poverty in India, and 173 million people in China. And in terms of percentage, regional populations, according to Sub-Saharan Africa, is about 40%, which had the highest incidence rate of absolute poverty in 2008. We want to look at facts about poverty in Uganda. I know in our classes we are having people who are living outside Uganda, but you can compare because you have lived here. Some of you have not had an experience of seeing what is happening within Kampala and outside Kampala. But you need to think broadly, and if you want to understand it, especially you people who are lawyers, you people who are health care practitioners, you need to have time and walk around and see what we are talking about. So about 67% of Ugandans are either poor or highly vulnerable to poverty. You can look back in your village, your family, and then you think whether you fit within this 67%. Uganda currently has 49 plus million people. More than 23.1 million are prone to poverty, and about 8.4 million of them, that is about 24.5%, are trapped in absolute poverty. A big percentage of the poor live in rural areas. Kampala has more than 4 million people, or 4 million population. Uganda is a very rich but poor country. It is host to the biggest inland lake, Victoria, longest river, Nile, located at the equator, with steady rainfall, highest block mountain, Rwenzori. Agriculture constitutes over 80% of economic activities. However, there are certain things, when you look at them, that dictate Uganda's poverty. Let us first look at the military expenditure. In 1988, Uganda spent 15 billion. In 2011, it spent, that is about 14 years later, it spent 638 billion on military. In 2023, Uganda has spent higher than most African countries. When you look at the agricultural budgetary allocations in Uganda, then you compare with the military expenditure, you will know the situation we are in. In 2001/2, Uganda spent 135 billion in agriculture. 210, those about 10 years later, it spent about 366 billion. And it was estimated to reach 437 billion in 2011-2012. Causes of poverty: precarious or insecure livelihoods, excluded locations, physical limitations. All these are causes of poverty. Gender relationships. problems in social relationships. Sylvanus, close. Lack of security, abuse by those in power, disempowering institutions, limited capabilities, weak community organizations. All these contribute to our poverty. Wealth. We started by looking at indicators of poverty. Here is an indicator of wealth. Maybe this might be going too far because this seems to be portraying a more magnificent building for royals, for presidents, but suppose you find a house like this one or closer to this one. It will imply, and we in Uganda we have people who have got closer to that one or even better than that one. I would want to quote like an example. Our current Speaker of the Parliament. You have seen her home, and that would indicate that there are some people somewhere who are wealthy. So we want to say, what is wealthy? If we talked about poverty is deprivation of basic needs, what is wealthy? The word wealth comes from Old English word well, which means well-being, and which means condition. So wealth, well-being, or condition. Wealth is the condition of well-being. Here we have types of wealth. There is what we call material wealth. Material wealth includes those physical things that we see: buildings, cars, farmland, cows, and so on. Material wealth. And when you look at them, you can define somebody to be wealth. Then there is what we call spiritual wealth. Jesus talked about this spiritual wealth in Matthew chapter 6. Blessed are those who have got spiritual satisfaction in spite of lack of material. There are people who are spiritually wealthy. Then the emotional, all these can contribute to what we mean by being wealthy. Then what is economics? The word economic comes from the Greek economia, meaning the management of the household. The household. When you manage your household, it may not necessarily mean that economics is in terms of money, but what you use to manage your home so that they are well off. To be able to achieve well-being or wealth in the management of your household or economics, you must have the right morals and ethics. There are people who are known to be having a lot of money, a lot of possessions, but when they do not manage them very well, then you find that the house is in lack because they don't have the morals to manage their money, to manage their wealth. So when we are talking about economics, in order to manage your household very well, you must have the right morals and ethics. We have what we call traditional African economics. Here we say wealth was for the well-being of the whole community. You don't have wealth for your own good, for your own family. When you owned wealth, it was a possession and it was a blessing of the entire community from an African economic point of view. Poverty was owned communally. If somebody was poor, the blame goes to the community. So it was the work of the community to uplift those who were poor, to show them how to become wealthy, or at least acquire a recognizable standard. Holistic approach to meaning of wealth. It was not only material but also spiritual, emotional, social, and psychological. So that's what we call holistic, all covering human life. African economies changed after getting in contact with Western economic systems. When we got the monetary economic introduced in our communities, initially we used to hear that Africans were using what we call barter trade system. But when the monetary economy was introduced, then there was a change in the economic system. An economic system characterized by private ownership of capital goods and investment that is determined by private decisions and by prices, production, the distribution of goods that are determined by competition in a free market. So you find that an economic system has some characteristics that influence it, either to private ownership, where we look at capital goods and investment, which would determine private decisions, determining the prices. He who has is the one who determines what to get. Production is determined by those who are in market. How do they distribute? All these determined competitive free market. Capital comes from Latin capitalis, meaning the head. In capitalism, everyone is fighting to be the head. There is a lot of competition. This promotes the law of survival for the fittest. When you are competing to present your idea to be better than others. You are presenting your goods to be better than others. And where sometimes some people say competition is good because it checks quality. Because if you have to appear in the market, you have to make sure that you are producing the best. Whereas on the other hand, there is corruption or painting the worst to look the best in order to compete.